I want to welcome everybody to today's installment of the SIREAS Executive Webinar Series. I'm Rob Toplansky, and I'll be your facilitator today. We have a terrific program today, a roundtable discussion featuring another powerhouse panel who will discuss planning for the rapidly evolving trends shaping and changing CRE services delivery models. And again, thanks for taking time out of your busy day and busy schedules to join us here. And so with that, I'd like to introduce today's panel. First up is Ingrid Fenn, President and CEO of SIREAS. Maureen Ehrenberg is CEO of Blueskyre, Innovation in the Built Environment. Colette Temmink currently serves as Chief Strategy and Product Officer at Blueskyre IBA. And all members of our panel have significant insight into the rapidly evolving trends shaping and changing CRE services delivery models. And they are here to share their experience and insight with you all today. So with that, I will hand the program over to Ingrid to get the discussion underway.
Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here. We're excited to have a conversation with you today, and wanted to start by talking a little bit about the evolution of FM and building technology. And Colette, this is something that has been a passion of yours for some time, and I thought maybe you could start off by giving us a little overview of your perspective of how that has evolved.
Yeah, I mean, FM is a relatively young profession, right? It began in the 1970s, so certainly in my lifetime. And it's interesting, facilities or real estate has been accused of being one of the first industries to implement IoT, but one of the last to be digitally disrupted. And so if you think about, there's a long list of why large-scale technology disruption has not happened, from cost, talent, right? Is it IT knowledge or building infrastructure knowledge that you need? The business case, the age of the building stock, when you look at the average age, or this continued challenge around, how do you actually quantify employee productivity, right? This elusive calculation of what percentage, how do you calculate it, especially across all the different professions? And so in that, we tend to leave out really how owners and occupiers make financial decisions amongst these alternative investments. So if you think about it from an occupier perspective, it's a lot more transparent to make a decision around a production improvement than it is around employee productivity improvements. And for building owners, the investment that they're making to increase their property value can take precedent over improving operating costs that are really pass-throughs to a tenant. And so of course, every industry is different, but if you think about the percentage in which companies lease versus own, in more cases than not, they lease more space than they own. And that is going to impact this progression of technology within our industry. But there's no doubt, and if you look at the back half of this chart, that it's accelerating. It's accelerating very fast, right? The 1970s, we began the discussion of BIM, and look where we are today, decades later. So it is going to happen faster. We are going to see this acceleration, and that progression for technology implementation is really going to be from seeing different dynamics like cost, efficiency improvements, building reliability, tenant retention, sustainability requirements, et cetera. And, currently we're in a phase of what I like to call experiential, smart, and green. And if you think about the employee experience, some smart building technology, certainly ESG, this is a phase of our profession, and we're going to evolve to this dynamic and automated. And that really means, can a building anticipate user needs and fulfill those needs on demand, right? This is a requirement of really action-based service delivery, understanding what's happening and then immediately delivering those services and fulfilling that kind of demand. And we're going to see smart building enhancements, and we're going to see, progression, but we're certainly going to see progression even in the service delivery and how those two come together, right? For the full ecosystem of an environment that companies are providing their employees. And so it is exciting. It's exciting just to see that acceleration. It's exciting to see where technology is going to progress to, right? And how it's going to impact the FM profession. You know, we're going to start seeing real-time monitoring of service delivery. We're going to enhance the employee experience and satisfaction, you know, within the space. We're going to see increased reliability and productivity. And so I'm excited to see this acceleration happen. So hopefully that answered your question. As you said, I'm pretty passionate about what's happened, but I'm excited about the future.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much, Colette. That was great. Maureen, anything you wanted to add here?
No, I agree with the impact. Also, in addition to just the smart building, the advancements we're starting to see in robotics have a lot of promise, but there's a lot of infosec issues and things to deal with there first. But in the end, we do believe that this whole idea of being digital and automated really changes what real estate is, becoming much more of a product as opposed to the more static as you look at the very start of when we started on the transformation journey with digital.
Great, thank you. So, you know, as the industry has matured and corporations have started to realize the significant impact of the workplace value clearly from that poll, you know, efficiency and culture and real estate strategy have been more and more the drivers to obtaining the corporate strategic objectives. And Maureen, how are those business objectives in your mind really driving FM trends?
Thanks, Ingrid. I think that if we wanted to look and say, what are the best indicators, because we see different business priorities across, and I always like to reference the IBM CEO survey because they get about 3,000 this time around C-suite respondents. And the top drivers that were cited by the survey for 2021 are leadership and core value proposition, technology, employees, open innovation, and cybersecurity. So if we look at those topics and then tie them out to what's actually happening in FM, what are the leading trends? If we think about leadership and core values, that's the concept of performing with purposeful agility. And that leads back to the ideas around flexibility, digitization, and some of those more leading trends around how workplace and facilities are being managed, and the importance of that response to understanding human needs and then understanding how to be a great leader and a different leader, a leader who leads with purpose and understanding really what the purpose of that organization is. So we're starting to see very different leadership styles and different leaders coming into FM, which is very exciting, all the way down to making people aware that FM is actually a profession and starting to recruit from high schools and colleges and putting more programs in place to train for FM as managing, as operating within the built environment. Second of all, technology. And the whole theme there is just making technology matter more. And technology is becoming one of the most important skill sets within FM today. Everything from understanding your CMMS flow, the importance of the data standards, the implications of IoT, the desire for apps and bringing all the experience services into that to curate a very well operated, safe environment. And then when you think about open innovation, the influence that open innovation can have by inviting FMs across the board and operating partners and suppliers that work with the FMs, the idea around continuous improvement, innovating much more quickly, getting that instant feedback you can that technology provides, the workflows, automation and workflows. Change management has always been a big issue in FM. And another issue in FM for many years has been that the idea that certain managers or leaders or engineers had a lot of the principles, practices, and procedures in their head. People were very concerned, well, if that person leaves the property, what happens if the systems don't perform the same way or whatever? And capturing instructions within workflow tools really helps ensure that everyone has the latest of the best practices and what you're pushing out, even if you're changing protocols. If you think of post-COVID, you've had to very quickly and holistically change the way you're operating these properties. And you can do that much more quickly and elegantly through a workflow system for consistency. And then obviously cybersecurity. There is a lot of risk around FM. The more we get into digital environments, this has been a conversation at Realcomm for a very long time. But we've even seen with some of the work we've done recently in robotics that depending on where the equipment is manufactured, that the ownership of the data that's going in there and the ability for like even for these little robotic vacuums to see what's going on within a lab or a test environment creates security issues. So it's going to go all the way from manufacturing and understanding the risk behind the cyber all the way to potential data breaches. And it continues to be high and in a very high level of awareness right now, with Homeland Security, as we saw recently with the hacker situation on the East Coast. So what are the themes here? They all tie back to the same larger themes that we saw on the poll you took, which is around ESG. And really, they're at the core of these business priorities, because if we think about environmental and sustainability, those things around the environment and sustainability do go down to talent retention, the idea of having a resilient platform that you're operating from, that you're managing your risk, operational excellence focus. When we look at social, I did find it interesting in the poll that if priorities are around diversity and inclusion, but it's very low on shared economy and opportunity, a massive trend we're seeing in FM is really a big encouragement to involve smaller, diverse businesses at the sites rather than doing very big buys. So technology really does allow you to have a much more diverse and inclusive supply chain, whether they're for anything from branch backs to manufacturing sites to buildings that you're managing and property or facility management. So that is all through a shared economy model. And this goes back to this concept of taking workflows. And if everyone understands what the workflow is to the instruction, you can begin to really create opportunity for some of those smaller FM businesses and related suppliers, and then ultimately governance. And we know through digital transformation, compliance and managing everything from work orders and purchase orders, all of this is impacting FM. So we believe that the major business trends, the overriding themes are ESG and SDGs, but at the end, it gets down to just the operations and implementing those in a very meaningful way to change the way people are operating and managing.
Thanks for that, Maureen. Yeah, Colette, did you want to add anything there as well?
Yeah, I would just say, Ingrid, from your vantage point, which is pretty unique, and there's some insights the audience can even glean from some of the things that you're doing. Are you seeing these business objectives, also shifting kind of the services, and whether that's an insourced or outsourced, or what are you seeing from your perspective?
Yeah, great question. I think certainly as the focus has shifted a little bit from more how do you tactically maintain assets, which of course is still important, to the holistic, how are you really providing an environment for that fosters work and for your employees in a place where employees really want to be. That has shifted where the line is of insourcing versus outsourcing, and has really caused a lot of organizations to start to question their sourcing strategy and how they've gone about thinking and about the delivery of the workplace and those services that are more hospitality and focused. And I think from a technology perspective as well, really those decisions on how you're going to aggregate data from the multiple sources, and that's driven by how you outsource and what your outsourcing strategy is, that started to shift. And there's I think as an industry, we're still trying to solve who owns the BI. Is that the business? Is that the outsource provider? Is that, if you use multiples, as Maureen was alluding to, where you're not just providing a fully integrated model under one provider, then you're looking at what does your technology strategy look like? And do you have to manage that internally? Or is there another solution? Because we find there's quite a lot of complexity there. If you have maybe 2 or 3 large strategic partners on, really how do you manage that and share business intelligence? So sorry about that. Maureen, any comments too?
I agree with your saying, Ingrid. That seems to be kind of the tripwire right now regarding the intent of doing things very differently, and then getting around some of the older models that are in place, and also working with the different stakeholders to involve them in a sourcing process. I would imagine that some of the processes you're going through right now have a lot more input. You've always had input from IT, but you're going to see more of the OT groups coming in, HR having a say into sort of the service levels and what they're expecting, because as we're going to go through, I think today, these trends are moving very quickly to push to different models to give more innovation and empowerment to the service providers.
Yeah, and so Maureen, I think that ties nicely into the concept of a hybrid workplace. Can you talk a little bit about what that is and how companies are thinking about work from that perspective?
Yeah, I was looking at this question a little earlier, and I thought, we have just experienced one of the most profound changes in human history, at least in memorable human history in society. And so within living memory, if people have now experienced a very different way, looking at what their priorities are, looking at new ways of doing things, access to new talent, the idea being that hybrids or hybridity brings a response to the needs of employers, people, companies, that allows them to come back to the workplace, come back to the different operational issues, meeting it a different way. And what that allows you to do is I always like to refer to it as the genius of the and, as opposed to saying it's got to be this way or that way. It could be something a little different that's inclusive. And that's what hybrid, I guess, really stands for. So when you look at flexibility, CO2 reduction, get greenhouse gases, the idea of getting access to talent in different places, and the idea for increased productivity, satisfaction, these drivers that are benefits of more remote or more flexible type work. And then also the idea of better collaboration, more access. There are some wonderful things that happen when you're in the workplace, and they're very, very important to people. We've seen it from all the surveys from Leafman to the large service providers that have done them. So when they boil it down to those basic employee needs, they're safety, belonging, productivity, comfort, and control. The new models are going to continue to include more ability for people to sort of curate their personal environment. And that's where the convergence is happening. And we've seen it happening for a while, but this push that we've had has been wonderful. And the push that we've had is that as people have experienced this profound change, their expectations have changed. And what that allows you to do is push sort of change management and innovation much more quickly to respond to that, offering these hybrids. And ultimately what that means is if the workplace and the buildings itself, and then you've got a more extensive technology network that overlays there, you can be more responsive to allowing people with their own technology to do everything from obviously reserving a place in the office, choosing the days they want. There's always this idea though of you've got to be able to manage the demand and the supply of what you've got. But ultimately, if you think of the fabulous impact that this much more perfect balance between supply and demand will do for companies and their workforces, will actually help us eliminate the age-old issue of all of this excess space. And when you start looking at some of the models, everything from owned to leased to landlord provided kind of overflow space now, which is co-working. And then you've got everything from flex space to co-working all the way to kind of these on-demand models now that are sort of like an Airbnb for office that involve hotels and everything else. The market's responding so quickly, and employers have access to all of these different models. And so it doesn't have to be that they have to curate them all themselves. They can have really meaningful service partners that can help fill the void and solve for whatever their hybrid is.
Yeah, great. So I think this is a perfect opportunity. Colette, we were going to have you speak a little bit about the different technologies that we're seeing be most relevant as we talk about supporting the hybrid workplace. So do you want to talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I would, separate from the obvious, right? The virtual connections like Zoom and Teams and occupancy management and space and desk reservation software. There's really these client requirements around performance management and automation, right? Coupled with this growing demand or increase, as Maureen had suggested, around service options, right? And aligned to these ESG drivers. And that's giving this kind of need for this hybrid service model. So if you think about, employees they're going to work from multiple locations, and many will require more services than they do today under these different models, right? Concierge services, health wellness, enhanced experience services, food service. And this shift to on-demand, episodic, personalized services instead of like dedicated full-time resources that are more there, fulfilling demand. It's really about consumption information that's going to be available, and that's going to be available through technology. So, if you think about Apple and Uber and Amazon and what they have in common, I think they clearly provide ease of use technology, services or marketplace, and they also have supply and demand, kind of both sides of the equation represented on one platform. And using a large ecosystem of vendors and suppliers, or this marketplace, for facilities management is pretty complex. And without the ability to really manage compliance, the workflow automation, cost, performance at scale, it's always been a historical challenge for procurement and CRE departments. And it's often the reason why some have engaged service providers to really manage their portfolios globally. And I think you saw 40% actually use some of those proprietary softwares. And I think technology is evolving, right? This mobile applications, this ability to integrate different systems and data sources and contract for solutions, that are curated, as Maureen suggested, and purpose-driven networks, right? So purpose-driven FM services are delivered locally, right? They may be managed centrally, but they're delivered locally. And understanding that diverse supplier base and how they're delivering those services, and supporting that ecosystem in that delivery, and really understanding it, whether that's your first tier providers or your second tier providers, and how do you continue to manage the performance of those vendors. And we're seeing technology, certainly in today's environment, bring that together.
That's a great place for you to kind of end off, because I wanted to talk a little bit about supplier relationship management and performance management and governance. And I think this is an area where there is still a huge opportunity when it comes to technology. But, if we step back a little bit, I think this is really front of mind for most CRE organizations. And it's how do we move from the kind of legacy tactical approach of vendor management to really true strategic relationship management and performance management and compliance and risk and governance, and what does that look like? And as I think more and more services have been outsourced, and certainly as more strategic relationships have become the norm, there is a need for this. Maureen, can you talk about how technology can support that? I think this is still an area, if you look at, when we talk about performance management with most clients and even service providers today, it's from a functionality perspective, it's still an Excel spreadsheet in a lot of ways. How can we think about performance management from a technology perspective? How are we, and where do you see the future going?
Yeah, well, if we take a step back and look at the intent, again, it goes back to intent. And I think when people do have purposeful intent to make change, they will. And so the idea, again, going back to this idea of a marketplace, if we look at the trends that have occurred in outsourcing over the past, 20 plus years, it went from sort of this idea of a managing agent model, which included many, many different types of local providers, different suppliers, and allowed many of those companies to grow and become quite substantial and actually consolidate over time. And then we went into an era of big self-performance, very large companies being pushed to self-perform more and more and more of the work. And what that started to do was cut out the smaller suppliers, eliminate opportunities for smaller local companies. And when you start look at some of the trends that are going on globally, there is a push for more focus on whether it's nationalization within some countries, to look at what opportunities exist locally for companies that are maybe just country specific. And they've got different standards rather than an international company coming in and providing that work. So there are all sorts of complicated reasons behind why supply chain is beginning to change a little bit there. But so the more you introduce these factors, the aggregator models, which are becoming very successful in the US and Europe and have been increasing in popularity in Asia Pacific, and I think will start to really move into Asia proper, will be making a big difference in allowing you to do this. But as Colette mentioned, it will introduce a little bit more complexity because it's the number of groups that are performing. And so if you've got a tier of a very diverse, smaller group of suppliers, managing some of the smaller sites, even getting involved in those larger sites, you then have a prime that is managing the majority of that and is accountable and responsible. And then if you think about it, you may have one prime in one region, one prime in another. The issue then comes into bringing it all up and starting to look at how is the performance looking with a single view of what's occurring, whether it's regionally or whether it's globally. And so that is when you start to see verticals happen, and you see the OEMs coming up with a solution, service providers, the large real estate service providers coming up with solutions, some of the soft services providers offering a view, but usually that view is through their lens. And so their lens is very specific around their scope. And the issue with what we've just covered around experience and SGDs and ESG and different compliance, there are many other pieces of data that have to come into the equation to really look holistically at performance management. I'll give you an example. We're working with a group right now that they have very specific priorities that the business has given them. And they're doing their work. And when they put this kind of force ranking prioritization, just using business intelligence around where the resources are going, where the people are going, where their time is going, they started realizing that a lot of their attention and time are going to things that are not even at the top of their top 3 or 5 priorities. They're being pulled into areas that are not top of mind and top priority. And so there's the challenge then is, all right, so I need to somehow change our focus or change our work plans or what we're doing to ensure that my focus is actually on our top business priorities. And that's where a performance management tool can really come in. Also gives you very quick access for a global business line across regions so they can see the performance rather than trying to pull things together in Excel or other reports. So we're seeing a lot of attention in the market for performance management. And right now, it's predominantly, is usually not a neutral group. It's with a lens of OEM or a lens of real estate. And so we believe there's a true need in the market for a performance management tool that is far more open and inclusive and holistic and unbiased.
So Maureen, just on that, and you touched on there was a question from the audience and you touched on it a little bit, but I think this is maybe a good time to kind of directly answer it. Interested about the ability to create opportunities for smaller firms to participate as opposed to the large global contracts. So you had mentioned that earlier in the conversation. How do we deal with the risk and compliance elements of this model and make it manageable? Sourcing in financial services is complex.
Right, exactly. Now, interestingly enough, some of the leading applications right now of this we're seeing happening in financial services groups, particularly in the US and in the UK. And what is providing this opportunity, it goes back to the tech, as Colette had mentioned. It goes back to creating a marketplace. And when you look at how advanced the aggregator type technologies are, you can buy CMMS systems off the shelf and create your own marketplace. The business can create, if they're not outsourced, they can create their own diverse marketplace. But the key is managing the workflow and the compliance. And it's actually in the tool and in the process. Everything from the vendor onboarding to ensuring that they've got the right compliance and protocols, they get entered in the system, they're approved. The work that they're given is managed tightly. It's on a purchase order. Using locational analysis, they know exactly when someone is at the site, the work they're performing, and even using QR codes to prove that they're at that piece of equipment in response to that CMMS ticket. Could be a soft services ticket, whatever. So what that is doing for many of the definitely groups with larger distributed portfolios is where it's happening the most right now. you're seeing that those managed workflow tools allow you to go into local communities and engage smaller suppliers in a very meaningful way. And so we believe that this model is going to become very, very important over the next several years, and it will become a priority. And I think the systems themselves are what is really the most important thing for ensuring that sort of compliance. That I think that question came from Morag Pyatt, and it was really an excellent question because it sounds, it does sound very complex, but that's the beauty of these tools today. And that's another reason why FM is advancing so quickly. It wouldn't have been possible several years ago. It would have been, you wouldn't even be able to match the purchase orders with the bills that were coming in. The systems match them literally in the system itself.
Great, thanks so much. So we've talked a lot today about the shift in priorities of both corporate organizations and CRE organizations, and how the way that we work has changed how we think about the workplace. And so as we think about this, and the focus has really shifted from just really on cost to value and flexibility. Certainly the need for flexibility is so important. What are the factors, Colette, that really come into the equation when you're thinking about building the new business case? Because you have to think about, or organizations are challenged to think about real estate a little bit differently. There's some level of investment required as we're seeing the importance and what the value that these assets are bringing to the table. How should clients be shifting their thinking?
So we probably put up the last chart and explain it from there. But if you think about even how FM services are bought, right? They're typically delivered locally. Even the larger IFM providers, which really means one contract, one provider for all services. And FM is very different than transactions and lease administration, right? Because FM encompasses, could be plus 100 services. And so they're very different work streams. And if you're really focused on cost and driving those economies of scale, then IFM contracts make a lot of sense. If you're thinking about flexibility, agility, innovation, right? So 80% of the market still uses kind of an out-task model. One, they're either not large enough for these kind of big global contracts, or they tend to focus on culture and other drivers. And so they're really trying to find that best provider. And that's always been, their struggle because technology wasn't available. And now they're starting to see this acceleration of technology enabling that. And their business cases are really looked at that. I want agility because I want one-year contracts, right? And I can change out vendors under those contracts. I want innovation because I'm getting innovation at the service level. If it's really cost and you're getting this platform to manage all those services centrally, and it's more kind of reactive and custodial, it makes all the sense in the world to have it under one contract. So these other factors that are coming into play are really driving the need for a variety of models. And when companies think about culture and how they want to retain that culture, I would start with performance first. What are you trying to accomplish? What are you trying to improve? Is it cost? Is it outsourcing so you can, focus on other things than, non-core? And so when you think about what is that objective, I would start with a data strategy to make sure that you have the data so you understand if you're moving the needle of what you're trying to accomplish. And then really focusing on that performance management piece of that and the business case to do that. And that's going to be a variety of these additional areas over just kind of cost and improvements on an annual basis.
Colette, just adding to that, do you think that will shift the areas of outsourcing, what clients are outsourcing?
I don't, because a lot of companies, if you think about maybe 10% actually are insourced and they're not delivering all the services, and nor should they, right? And they go to out-task. And so it really does, the services are going to be performed by third parties. There may be some that are retained more, like the ones that actually touch the employees, because they want to provide that, curated, experience that's in alignment with their culture. And so that's where we say start with performance. What are you trying to achieve? And then you can decide which services you want to outsource or which ones you actually want to deliver to your employees, but it should be in alignment with your objectives first, and then the sourcing strategy.
And really how you approach the market and how you choose to outsource.
You know, we all get pressures, right? As a corporate real estate executives, the market's shifting and they're saying outsource, outsource, outsource to one provider. But we're suggesting stop and think about what the company is trying to achieve, and then mapping the best strategy. And that may be one outsourced provider, or it may be, you know, bundled services to soft service companies, which are really services for the occupant, or hard service companies, which is really the care and feeding of the building.
So just a quick question from the audience. What does the gray box represent in the IFM model?
It's really that. So the other three blue boxes tend to fall in what we call a hybrid sourcing model, kind of that variety. And then the gray box is really the integrated facilities management. So if you think about, you know, if you're focused on cost and you're focused on custodial, the processes, then an integrated facilities management contract suits that. If you're thinking about innovation at the service level, you want agility in your contract structures, you want more hospitality, then you tend to stray from that one particular model of one provider, and you're looking for more of that hybrid solution. And hybrid just means this combination of technology and services.
Right. It's interesting. I was having a conversation with the chief revenue officer from one of the very large soft services global companies, and they were telling me that over the last year, they've had a big change in a lot of their contracts where they've gone from fixed and guaranteed prices to the clients really wanting to go much more pass-through. And the reason I want to go to a pass-through is they not only needed the flexibility and agility, they could not predict demand for whether it's food or cleaning or anything else, and they wanted much more transparency to that billing. But what that allows them also to do is focus on more on-demand, curated, personalized services, introduction of more tech into their offering, and the ability to continuously innovate, which is very challenging when you're in a very prescriptive contract and model with a lot of money at risk, and when you've got to decide how you're going to kind of push from one to the other. So they saw benefits and negatives to it, obviously, but in the end, they were fascinated to see how quickly the demand was changing to try to get into these blue boxes versus writing out their old contract and hoping for the best, because I guess hope's not really a great strategy.
Yeah, and I mean, I think also, you know, there's levels of integration, and it's really about how you're integrating. And I think you're going to ultimately have some of this within an integrated, or all of this within your model. I think we started to see a little bit of a hybrid when it comes to the hospitality services and the FM services. And that also really is, you need to determine by location and what is applicable based on your spaces. So where you have large campuses with big food programs and things like that, you may be looking at a different type of model than where you're just providing some small amenity support, which an FM provider could potentially do for you at a more cost solution. So I think looking at hybrid, whether it's technology, whether it's services, it's what makes sense for the strategy to really align with what you're trying to achieve as an organization.
You know, Ingrid, I have a question for you, which is how can clients, you know, shift the focus from cost alone to cost and value and flexibility? Because if we are really moving towards these other areas of interest, and it doesn't mean some people may be interested in hospitality more than the others. Someone may be very interested in pushing towards a, you know, very holistic ecosystem, hitting on those trends. What has to change in the way cost is looked at or value in a new business case?
Well, I mean, I think it really aligns nicely to this conversation because data is the power there. And you know, historically, I think when the focus was on cost, it was driving cost out of a category. And when you look at value, you're looking at value across a delivery model, across your portfolio. and you can drive down cost in areas while adding value in other areas. And I think, one good example of that is levels of technology and automation has enabled reductions in the need for administrative support like procurement and vendor management and these types of functions. When their focus was solely on cost, there was never looking across the internal organization about where there were other value add impacts, and those were never considered. So it always looked like you were adding additional costs and you weren't really considering the full value to the organization. So I think that's one thing. But I also think, organizations are starting to see that real estate is more than just the cost of the buildings. And it's about a strategy that aligns them to really achieve corporate goals. And that's around the right talent, being in the right locations, and thinking about work in a different way. So thinking about the workplace of a place where you come to be creative and collaborative, as opposed to the more heads down work, providing the different solutions. And all of that can be managed so much better through integrated and smart technology that helps to enable that.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I was to say, you said it well. When you think about how those facility services are delivered locally, right, even by diverse suppliers, and even the large IFM contracts they purchase from the same providers, it's really around the platform. How are you managing that ecosystem of vendors? And historically, technology wasn't available to organizations that were out tasking to really manage that in the same in the same type of quality they were getting from the larger providers. That's changing. Technology is now enabling that workflow automation. So the cost is being driven down. They're getting those economies of scale, and they're starting to get performance management, because that's always been the struggle. Even if you look at prior surveys, some of the biggest struggles with outsourcing some of the services was really around, corporate culture. Did the service provider, were they able to meet the culture that I have? And in addition to that, were they able to drive the quality that I needed in the service delivery? And when you're managing that performance through technology, you're starting to achieve that. And we're starting to see that happen. And it's pretty exciting in our industry, what's available and the choices that are available to companies now.
And I think you're also seeing a shift in what performance management means from, tactically, can you deliver, which that should be just base. That really has nothing to do with, so to speak, performance management, to is the relationship performing because we're driving innovation and we're creating value. And I think, that kind of goes to what Maureen was saying before, to that shift from, tactical delivery to creation of value as a partnership.
Right. And just that dynamic element, when you look at that 4 quadrants, that idea of being digital means that by getting much more feedback into the system regarding everything from utilization data, information data regarding days of the week where different services are needed, it's no longer a rear view mirror look at certain things. It could become far more inclusive around actually monitoring that ecosystem that you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's one more question around this. Are the larger firms as skilled in the other boxes, the blue boxes? I would say yes. We're starting to see some of the bigger FM players focus on that technology, whether that's proprietary or not, but they are starting to look at that shift. I would say some aren't there yet, but it is certainly something to watch if you still want one provider, and can they provide those 3 quadrants? I think, Ingrid, you're probably closest to this than anyone, if they're able to, hit innovation. And to me, culturally, cost and innovation are very different. And when you're asking providers to do that, do they have the culture of delivering both of those? But what is it, from your perspective, what are you seeing some of the larger providers?
I think, every provider is investing in these boxes right now. And there are clients where there has been levels of success, and others where there has been challenges. And I think that there are a lot of reasons for that. And some are driven by, gaps in the service provider's capabilities, and others are driven by limitations within the client and how it works to integrate technology and things like that. So there's I think a lot of complexity still that needs to be solved for. And this is one of the areas that will continue to be an area of opportunity. And it's just changing so rapidly that at the same time as we're trying to solve for it, there's more and more opportunities to look at things a little bit differently.
But don't you see, I guess it seems that you can listen to different groups talk, and the one theme that we kept hearing repeatedly throughout the pandemic, during webinars, conversations, industry conversations, was this mantra of great is the enemy of good, great is the enemy of good. And where there's a time and a place for that, because obviously innovation means, testing for continuous improvement, there's also great. And there are great companies, and they could be great local companies, or someone could be really great in hospitality, maybe not so great in integrated performance and data management. It depends on what their core focus and function is as they try to move into these other areas. And you would think that with the idea of creating a more inclusive ecosystem and curated ecosystem, there could be a change in openness of supply chain groups or buying groups to actually work with an advisor, I guess such as SIREAS, to say, do we really need to start looking again at one big buy and pick the best of the good rather than the great? Because then I've got good everywhere, not great everywhere, but good's fine, because then I just have one company, as opposed to looking at different regional suppliers, looking at different local country suppliers, looking at, again, your agenda to create opportunity and let new businesses try to enter the field and opportunity for new talent. The technology can help if your biases change as well to what is the right model, and be accepting to try and experiment to bring into different areas that may be a priority, and they may not all be with the same supplier, but they're incented properly to work together and make sure that all, the rising tide floats all boats, rather than there's one winner and loser, which has very often traditionally been the way some of these contracts work.
So with that, leaving everyone with something to think about for the rest of the afternoon, I think we're just about out of time. So I want to take the opportunity to thank everyone for joining, to thank the panel for participating, and to really give Colette, Maureen a minute for final comments to our audience.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. Exciting future ahead of us in FM. So
great. Well, thanks so much for joining us.
thank you for the invite. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Stay safe.
Bye.
Bye.